Quicksilver friends, this is Joli from QuickSilverHair, and today I wanted to talk to you about the 9 things that everyone is surprised by when they transition to gray. These are things that we see pop up in the groups as admins, especially on Facebook, all the time. And in the 7 years since I've transitioned to gray, I see these, like almost everyone seems to go through one of these as a surprise, if not several of them. So I thought I would kind of collect them into one place, so if you run across this while you're transitioning, you'll have a better idea of what to expect and not be so surprised by these things. So let's get started. Number 1 is that the color that your hair actually is not what you expected it to be. We often dye our hair the second we see those roots pop up because we see that white and it's so distinct against our dye that we think that what we saw as that distinction is what the whole head of hair will be. So a lot of people are very surprised that maybe their hair wasn't as bright or as dark or whatever as they thought it was. Which brings me to number 2. It's not all one color. A lot of people think that because what they see is white, that their whole head is white. Or that they see like this salt and pepper blend in their roots between dye jobs and they think their hair is all salt and pepper. And they get really surprised as it starts growing in that it has variation, it has differences on one part of the head versus the other, which brings me to point number 3. The next thing that surprises people the most is streaks of white, of dark, the nape being darker than the rest of their hair, or the top of the hair being dark and it being white underneath. There are patterns and variations depending on your genetics that are, in my opinion, just fantastic. I call them Mother Nature's brush strokes. I think of it like a painting, and that when we take one stroke of paint that's mixed together with black and brown and white, that it comes out distinctly different from the next stroke when you come back down. So it is, to me, absolutely beautiful. There are a lot of people that don't like it. So, be ready to see it in a different light. It might not be solid color. That's the illusion sometimes to using especially one permanent color on your hair. Like I was dyeing my hair with permanent red dye and it was all one color. There was no distinction, no dimension. And that was actually one of the things that was frustrating to me about dye was I wasn't getting any depth. It was just this one solid, boring color. And I think that a lot of people that have been in the solid color phase, especially if you've been doing highlights and lowlights, you might be pleasantly surprised that you have your own natural highlights and lowlights. But if you weren't doing highlights and lowlights and you were doing the solid color, it may surprise you how much dimension your hair has and how many different colors it has all around. I have a white streak, I have a dark streak, I have dark brown hair still at the nape of my neck, and I can fold my hair back like this in a cute little style and you can see all of the differences in color. And you can see all of, it's different on each side of my head, it's different on the back versus the front. And I love it because I finally got dimension without damage. I finally was able to have highlights and lowlights without bleaching and dyeing and sitting at the salon for hours on end. So for me, I love it. And I hope when yours grows out, if you're in that process right now, that you learn to love it too. Because like I said, I see it as Mother Nature's brush strokes and I think they're glorious. Anyway, number 4 that people are really surprised by is new hair growth. So when you ditch the dye, your scalp has a chance to heal and the follicle has a chance to heal. And many people don't realize how much hair loss they have from dyeing their hair. I particularly noticed right away that I stopped having so much shedding in the shower, especially, in the realm of the dye job, where, whenever I had dyed my hair, within the first few days, I lost a ton of hair. And then the week following, I lost a lot of hair. And then, I'd get a break for a little bit and then I'd dye it again and I'd lose a bunch more hair. But what happens, because you're not giving that assault to the scalp every 3 weeks, you get new hair growth. Many people see it as frizz, and it's not frizz. In my opinion, I think most of it is happy, new, healthy hair. And embrace it. It means your hair is going to get thicker. Mine did. It went from very thin to more on the thin to normal side. I found that wonderful because I had always struggled with having, very thin hair. And even though I have curly hair and it looked like I had a lot of hair, it's still pretty thin. And when I stopped dyeing it and it started thickening up a little bit, I was elated because it just meant that I had a little bit more hair on my scalp. That brings me to point number 5, a pink scalp. Everyone is always really surprised about how pink their scalp can get, or how bright it can get. Not everybody's gets pink, but it can get bright. And it can be, noticeable on your part. It can be, when you have a certain hairstyle where sections of your scalp are showing, people get surprised by that. I believe it is caused by 2 things. One, when you are dyeing your hair, especially a darker color and a permanent color, you're dyeing your scalp. That's why you or your stylist had to wear gloves while applying the dye. It's not just to protect your skin from the chemicals in the dye, which we won't get into that, but it is to protect your hands from being dyed while applying the dye. So if you have to protect your hands from the dye, then your scalp is being dyed also. So we weren't used to seeing the actual color of our scalp. The second thing that I think is happening is that the scalp is happy. It's healthy, it's happy, it's not being coated in chemicals anymore. And even if you're using natural dyes, it still is affecting the scalp. It's still affecting the skin. And, I think that it's the scalp saying, hey, I'm happy, just like the new hair growth. That brings me to point number 6, which is going from oily scalp to dry scalp, or dry scalp to oily scalp. Many people notice that their hair changes with the dye, and so does their scalp. So you may notice that your hair and scalp were dry while you were dyeing it, and it becomes a little bit oilier, or the opposite. For me, my hair was usually very dry at my scalp, and my scalp was always dry and itchy and irritated. And when I ditched the dye, some of that let up, which was wonderful for me because I'm not a fan walking around scratching my scalp all the time. I think for most people, this stabilizes after you ditch the dye within about 3 to 6 months, because the follicle and the sebum and the scalp kind of level out and calm down. So whether it's gotten really oily or really dry, just wait it out. It will get better as the months go on. Number 7 is changes in texture. Many people notice that their hair gets coarser or silkier or softer. The myth out there is that gray hair is coarse. That is not true. Not all gray hair is coarse. Some gray hair is fine and silky, like mine. Mine is very silky. It's very soft. And as a matter of fact, it can be too soft. It can be so soft that it goes, my curls fall out. It can be so soft that I might have, flat top because it's so silky at the roots that they just fall flat. And I love the texture of my gray hair. I know that some people do experience their hair getting coarser as it gets gray, but I do believe that if you find the right products with really good moisture and slip in them, and you keep your hair very hydrated, it won't be as coarse. So remember that gray hair is thirsty, and the change that you'll need to make is in your conditioning products. Number 8 is changes in hair type. There's a couple of things that happen when you're dyeing your hair. You're damaging the cuticle and you're damaging the follicle, which both dictate how your hair curls or waves or is straight. So your hair type might change a little bit when you ditch the dye, simply because you're healing the cuticle, you're healing the follicle. Another aspect of this is that many of us who are ditching the dye are somewhere around that phase of life called menopause. Many of us didn't notice that the hormones were changing our hair type, but ditching the dye and going through menopause for me was a double whammy. and it changed my hair a little bit. It got wavier, but not in a bad way or anything. It just changed enough that I had to change how I dealt with it. Many people notice that their straight hair gets curlier, and I think that is, some people were causing so much damage with the dye that it was just breaking the curl, so to speak. So don't be surprised if your hair type changes once you've completely ditched the dye. Number 9 is the one I see most people the most surprised by. And that is, you think you've ditched the dye and you've ditched the maintenance. Not so much. You have not ditched maintaining your hair. You can't just throw in the towel and forget about your hair. Many people think that they were just going to be able to, stop going to the salon altogether except for haircuts, and they would buy some shampoo and conditioner and that was it. They'd be done. But that's not the case. The thing is that gray hair is thirsty. For whatever reason, it is drier than other pigmented hair types. And it takes understanding what kind of moisture your hair needs. So curly hair, of course, needs a lot of moisture. So curly gray hair is going to need a lot of moisture. Even if your hair is straight, I still suggest you use a leave-in of some sort to help protect it. Moisture, when properly balanced in your hair, will protect it from the environment and protect it from like swimming pools and so forth. So that'll help with keeping you from getting discolorations. The next thing to really, really pay attention to is UV and heat protection. The problem with sun damage and heat damage is that once it's there, you can't undo it. You can't bleach it out. You can't fix it. It has to grow off because you have permanently altered the color of your hair with the damage. When you have sun damage, it's damaging the hair at the molecular level. It is breaking down molecules in your hair and changing their color. So that's what causes the yellowing from sun damage. When you have heat damage, you are actually singeing and burning the hair. When you dye your hair, you probably had heat damage too. You just didn't know it. You probably just couldn't see it. But once your hair is white, you want to be really careful with heat because you will be able to see it if you damage it. So make sure you use a heat protectant. Make sure you use a UV protectant. And understand that UV and SPF are two different things. UV protection is filters that you put on your hair that filter the sunlight to keep it from damaging the molecular structure of your hair. SPF is for skin. So your scalp needs SPF. And because pigment in your hair, when you have it dyed or you have naturally dark hair still, helps protect your scalp because it creates shade, you no longer have that. So that healthy pink scalp is exposed to the sun. You will get sunburns and scalp damage if you do not protect your scalp with some form of SPF protection. Either a hat or a buff or a scarf or SPF sprays. SPF sprays and UV sprays, two different things. But anyway, those are the 9 things that I see most commonly that people get surprised by in the groups. And I hope this list has helped you. I hope that you have gotten an insight into some of the things to expect while you're growing out your gray hair. None of it's worth panicking over or worrying about. It's just new things to embrace. When it comes to maintenance, think of it this way. When you were dyeing your hair, you had to buy dye, buy color protection shampoo and conditioner. You had to make sure that you didn't wash your hair for a few days after you dyed it. You had made sure that you scheduled those appointments regularly so your roots didn't show. So you had things that you were doing that you were used to about dyeing your hair. Now you just have to change the things that you're going to need to do and become used to for protecting your silver hair. It takes a little bit of time, so don't be overwhelmed by it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found some insights, and I hope they've helped you during your transition. And until next time, shine on.